Hey folks, hello, how's everybody doing? Welcome. So, if you want to just say hello in the chat, or if you want to introduce yourself, you're welcome to do that, either way. Otherwise, we'll just get started here. So the plan for today is that I will kind of just talk a little bit about, I'll introduce myself, talk a little bit about the course, go through the basic assignment types. Hello, Zoe. Or maybe I didn't say that right, sorry. I'll go through the basic assignment types, when they're due, stuff like that. And then I'll go through the PowerPoints for chapter 1. Week by week, we might do a little differently. I might show a video some weeks. I might do some of the PowerPoints for each chapter. It'll kind of depend. This week, I'll just focus on the first chapter, and you guys can kind of do the second chapter on your own. Before we get started, any questions about anything? Hey, Wiley. Okay, so let me share my screen. Let's go over here. All right, let's just share this screen. So this is our basic course. Sorry, for those of you who are familiar with all this stuff, click on these little down arrows over here to get more content. So here are just a few kind of starting things. If you want to change your preferred name, things like that. Over here in this second box, it says syllabus and ebook. We've got a link to our syllabus for the semester. We've also got a link to our textbook and a little bit of info about the weekly meeting, which will normally be Sunday mornings. I think for this class, it's 9 a.m. on Sunday mornings. Let's see, weekly meeting, 9 a.m. So not necessarily expecting you guys to be here, but I would love to have you. If not, I'll post a recording. Here's contact hours for me. I go by Gora. It's the first part of my first name, or you can just call me Mr. Rader, Professor Rader. I'll briefly introduce myself. I have a master's degree in social psychology, working on a PhD. I also have a master's degree in philosophy. So psychology is a very broad area. My specialty is not in developmental psychology, but I've been teaching psychology classes for a long time, and there's a fair amount of overlap. Here are some resources for you. Tutoring, please make use of the tutoring services in Davidson Hall or the library, stuff about accessibility. Link to the library, campus mental health resources. If you're struggling with anxiety and depression, as most people in the world are right now, is always a good idea to get help. Help is not a magic cure, but it can make things a little better. Link to financial aid stuff, more resources here. What's in this one? Here's some Cengage stuff. This stuff will be very useful when you're writing your papers because it'll give you a formatting guide, and there's even a student paper template. You can just use this template and put in your information, and you will be off and running on a good start to your paper. Here's some information about the writing assignments. All right. Beyond that, we have the different weeks. I won't open the box for each week. That would take a while, and they're all pretty similar. So we'll just look at week 1. So here we have week 1, preparation and learning materials. So if you click on this link, it'll tell you what chapters to read. Read chapters 1 and 2. There are also videos to watch, which are helpful in understanding this content. You may not have to read them or watch all these to get a good grade. There may be some of them will be related to some of the assignments, but they will certainly all help you understand the material better. So always start with that link, open that up, see what's going on. Along with that preparation link, you'll have the PowerPoints to the chapters for each week, which I will go through during lectures. You'll have links to the actual readings here. You'll have discussion assignments. Typically, there will just be one per week, I believe. These are going to be due Thursday night. So your initial reply and your responses are due by Thursday night, okay? So try and make your reply earlier in the week. That is helpful, but either way, your response and your replies, you're supposed to make a 250 to 300 word post, which is, like a good sized paragraph. And then you're supposed to reply, and your reply should be more than one sentence. Don't just say nice job, or don't even say I really enjoyed your post, that was a great job. Either one of those you will not get full credit for. Okay, so say something meaningful in your responses. In addition to that, we've got a journal assignment. So this will actually be the first assignment that's due every week. It's due Wednesday night. Looking at this assignment, and I see that some of you have started it already. It will say, and maybe this will be helpful, magnify it a little bit, brighten it up. Tell me something you new you learned from the reading. Tell me why this stood out to you. Tell me how you can use this information in your field. Tell me if there was a topic that was discussed you'd like clarification on. You should cite that source. So in theory, your answers here should have sources to the textbook. It's a good opportunity to practice. I actually won't take points off on these assignments if you don't have an in-text citation and a reference, but if you want to do them, to do it optimally, you should do that. 3 to 4 sentences per response, except for 4. So look, you need about 10 sentences essentially to do this right. If you ask questions, I will do my best to answer them. So that can be a way that we can actually interact on a weekly basis. Ask a question about something and I'll try and respond to it. Okay, so that's due on Wednesday. Every week you'll have a journal entry due on Wednesday. Then every week you'll have a discussion due on Thursday. So this is just an introduction, but this is the more meaty assignment. And this is what you'll have every week. So essentially, read week 1 preparation link, watch any videos, use the discuss tool. So discuss tool is just down here. Type your response. 250 to 300 words. Choose 2 questions from below to answer. Please remember to use in-text citations and references. So 2 questions out of these list here to respond to. And the question itself, if you put that in your answer, does not count towards your 250 or 300 words. It is helpful if you include the question, just so that everyone knows which question you're responding to, and then put your answer after it. Sometimes people have a tendency with these discussion posts to treat them like text messages. They are not text messages. This is a professional environment. So, proper capitalization, proper punctuation. Don't say things, don't use the types of abbreviations you would use if you're texting someone. Even like hey is not really appropriate. Something more formal like hello, if you want to address someone, would be better, or even hi is a little better than hey. If you say hello, blah, ball blah, put a comma after hello, because one goes there, right? Even if you would leave them out and you're texting someone. So treat all these communications as professional, even in your discussion posts. By the way, a little side note, if you email me and your email is not professional, I may tell you, hey, please resend this email and retype it professionally. I'm not trying to be a jerk or anything, and I'm not even super formal person myself, but it is really important to learn how to communicate professionally. All right, so Wednesday night, you'll have your journal. Thursday night will be your discussion post. Those will be due, all 3 of them. Friday will be a paper, although there's only papers 2 times throughout the semester. So if there's not a paper due, you won't have anything Friday. And then Saturday, the chapter quizzes are due. So if we click on one of these, it will look something like this. You will have a bunch of true or false or multiple choice questions. These are obviously open book because you're doing them at home. Right? So you can use the textbook to do that, and you're allowed 3 attempts to complete these quizzes. Okay, that's kind of the nuts and bolts as far as stuff I wanted to cover. Any questions about anything so far? You can just either talk or you can put a question in the chat if you would like. Okay, so we will just move on, and what that means is we will move right into the content for this week, if we can find it. Here we are. Okay. So this is a developmental psychology class. Textbook is called Human Development Lifespan View. So I assume that most of you all have taken a psychology class before. So developmental psychology is a little challenging in the sense that we're going to be thinking about all the things we thought about in general psychology, how the brain works, emotions, mental illness, mental health, the biology of behavior, the biology of mental health, the biology of happiness, the biology of lots of things. So all these things that are covered generally in psychology, we're going to be thinking about how these different topics apply at the different stages of human development. And we have some major theories that will guide our exploration in this topic that we'll go through as the course progresses. So ultimately, a very fascinating topic, in my opinion, just like general psychology is. There's a lot that you can learn through this course, just like general psychology. It's a lot of information. The more, as with anything, the more you put into it, the more you'll get out of it. But that's especially true of these psychology classes because they are literally about you. These are sort of owner's manuals. What does it mean to be a human? There have been millions of hours of research done about human psychology. And thankfully, we have that knowledge collected and written up for us by wonderful people. And we get to read it and learn from it and use it to make our lives and the world a better place. Woohoo! Okay, that's my little speech about the benefits and value of psychology. Any questions about the topic of developmental psychology? Okay, let's move forward. So we will jump through these things because I think they don't really work very well online. And we'll even jump through some things like this because we don't have a ton of time. So these meetings will go for an hour at most, just FYI. All right, 1.1, thinking about development. Key questions. What are the 3 fundamental issues of development? What are key aspects of each one? What are the basic forces in the bio-psycho-social framework? So that's how we're going to try and understand people. We're trying to understand them at the biological level. That is the level of neurons in the brain and neurotransmitters and neural networks, but also hormones, right? So when we talk about the biology of behavior, we're talking about the brain system, but we're also talking about the hormonal system because hormones like estrogen and testosterone have very big effects on behavior. The psychological refers to basically our individual experience, right? How do we experience? So you can look at a brain and talk about the different neurons firing, or you can ask someone how they're feeling, right? So we can know what a depressed brain looks like under a brain scan, or we can hear someone tell us that they're depressed, right? Or we can look at things from a social perspective and we can say, well, this person doesn't leave their house ever and they don't have any friends and they don't have social interaction. I think it's safe to say they're probably depressed, right? It's funny to me. I mean, I use my phone a lot, but just thinking about phone usage, like it's so clearly a depressing activity. Like you're sitting quietly, not talking, just staring blankly. It's like just looking at the physics and the sociology of it. It's so clearly a depressing activity. Of course, backed up by research. Okay, what are the key aspects of each? Biology, psychology, and sociology, the social aspects. And what is the neuroscience perspective? What are its advantages in understanding human development? some recurring issues in human development, nature versus nurture. So what is the influence of heredity or genes versus the environment? Continuity versus discontinuity. Does development progress smoothly throughout the lifetime? Are there abrupt changes? One question generally about the field of human development is the next one, universal versus context specific. Is there just one way or multiple ways in which development occurs? And I think this is particularly relevant because our context has changed so much in the, I'm 42 years old, and, in the 3+ decades that I've been growing up, been cognizant, aware of the world, life has just changed beyond comprehension. It's hard to explain how different things were when I was a teenager, not even 30 years ago, 25 years ago, to what it is like now with phones. So that's a very relevant question, and something really we all need to be thinking about, because technology is changing the world so much, and we need to figure out how to adapt and how to best manage it in our lives and incorporate it in our lives and minimize the damage that it's doing. Some basic forces. There are biological forces. So some of these are genetic. Some of these are, what we actually do on a daily basis, right? If you go to the gym and lift some weights, that is going to profoundly affect your brain and the way your genes are expressed, right? So when we talk about genetics, there's our genetics that we're born with, but you can think about the genetics that you're born with. To some extent, that's like a palette of paint. But the genes that are actually expressed in your current genome, which genes are active and which ones are inactive, are related to the choices we make, the foods we eat, the social environments we're in, the physical environments we're in. We can think about psychological forces, and these include cognitive or perceptual, emotional, personality, sociocultural forces, lifestyle forces. So we're going to think about all these different things and the way they influence development at different stages of life. We cannot understand psychology in any meaningful or complete way, maybe not meaningful, but certainly in any complete way, without understanding neuroscience, at least somewhat. Neuroscience is the study of the brain and the nervous system, especially in terms of brain behavior relationships. We got to understand this brain thing that's doing all this stuff to us, which of course, this brain thing is us. We don't feel like we're a brain. We feel like we are a center of awareness and experience, but our brain is creating all those perceptions for us. Okay. So let's talk about some of our major theories. Some questions. What is meant by a developmental theory? What are the major, and then now we get into some of our theories. What are the major aspects of psychodynamic theories? What are the major versions of learning theories? What are the main points or theories of cognitive development? What are the main ideas of ecological and systems approaches to human development? And what are the main ideas of lifespan and life course perspectives of human development? Okay, what is a theory? Onward and upward. Get a drink of water here. A theory is an organized set of ideas that is designed to explain something, in this case development, essential for developing predictions about behavior. So a good theory allows us to predict what's going to happen in the future. And that's how we know if a theory is good. We use a theory to make predictions, and then we see if our predictions come true. Predictions result in research that helps support or clarify the theory. Sometimes we need to modify the theory, and then we make new predictions and see how those hold up. And we modify the theory again. We make new predictions and see how those hold up. There are no truly comprehensive theories of human development. Human development is very complex. It's happening on many different levels at any given time. So there's not really one theory that can encapsulate everything that's happening from the cellular level to the brain development level to the body's and musculoskeletal level to a person's sense of self, to happiness, to mental illness, to learning, right? There's so many different aspects of development that no theory can capture all of them. But each theory will give us sort of a piece of the puzzle. It will help us understand ourselves, the people around us, the world a little bit better, hopefully. Okay, psychodynamic theory has its roots to Freud, Sigmund Freud, in some ways the father of modern psychology. Okay, so according to psychodynamic theory, development is largely determined by how well people resolve conflicts they face at different stages. So Freud's theory is the least scientific of all these theories. We still talk about it because it's Freud and he was there first, but there's a lot of it that is just silly, and some of it that is just highly inadequate, capturing all the complexity. But we still talk about him. We will talk more about Erik Erikson's psychosocial theory. So Erikson came after Freud. He was kind of inspired by Freud, but he broadens his perspective a bit. According to Erik Erikson's psychosocial theory, there are 8 stages: trust versus mistrust, autonomy versus shame and doubt, initiative versus guilt, industry versus inferiority, intimacy versus isolation, generativity versus stagnation, and integrity versus despair. So essentially, the way Erikson sees development, first we have to develop a sense that the world is a safe place, a good place. And if we have that, we have basic trust. If we don't get that, then we end up with basic mistrust. Next stage would be realizing that we're an independent person who can make decisions, or maybe that process, we have a parent that is too harsh with us, we experience shame and doubt maybe. Maybe we experience, maybe we develop the ability to try new things and handle failure, or maybe we start to feel guilty, more shame, more guilt, more negative things. Again, kind of similar. These 3 are kind of similar. Industry versus inferiority. Either we learn basic skills and learn to work with others, or we feel inferior because we can't do those things. Adolescence, according to Erikson, was all about identity. Are we able to find an identity for ourselves, or do we remain confused? So one thing to understand is that development was probably a lot more linear, certainly a few hundred years ago, definitely 100 years ago, probably even 50 years ago. Things were much more, there weren't as many options, right? If you were a woman, you just got married by the time you were in your early 20s, except for, very occasional person who didn't. Same thing if you're a man, except it happened a couple years later, right? Life was, and then you started having kids, and then you worked at the same place for 30 years, and then you retired. Like, life was a very sort of had a certain pattern to it that held up over the generations. Nowadays, with technology, which has dramatically reshaped everyone's life, computers, like, we're sort of in a very turbulent time. So development, identity is not something that is sort of fixed forever now. It certainly takes a lot longer to come online, and it's probably more fluid and probably something that continues to develop more so than in previous times. Erikson sees the next stage as intimacy versus isolation, which is basically, are you able to have a successful, long-term, committed relationship, or do you fail at that and feel lonely? Now, again, I think there's more room here. Some people are polyamorous, or some people are choosing to be single for longer, or maybe their whole life, right? So there's more different options in this regard. Middle adulthood, he calls generativity versus stagnation. He thinks it's about sort of giving back. Are you caring for children or giving back in some other way to the world to make the world a better place? Or do you start to sort of stagnate? Do you start to, feel like you're not really accomplishing anything? And then at the end, you either look back on your life with integrity, which is sort of like the integer being a whole number, like a sense of wholeness, a sense of completeness, or do you look back on your life with a sense of sadness and despair, like, I didn't really accomplish anything meaningful, sort of. So hopefully you all reach the later portion of your life and you feel much integrity. But that's how he views life. So unlike Freud, who a lot of his stages are just not useful at all, all of Erickson's stages are useful. They just maybe don't capture everything that's happening at every stage, but it is a useful framework and it does capture some of what's happening at these different stages. Okay, another theory is behaviorism. Development has a lot to do with learning and how we learn. So operant conditioning, there was a chapter on this in your introduction to psychology class. That's the positive reinforcement, negative reinforcement stuff. A reinforcement is anything that makes a behavior likely to increase. A punishment is anything that makes a behavior likely to decrease. This could be a reward, like you're training a toddler or training a dog and you offer them a treat. But it could also be something emotional, like you go to a party and you feel anxious. Okay, that's a punishment in a sense. No one's punishing you, but it's a negative thing that's happening to you that makes that behavior less likely to happen in the future, right? Or if you go to a party and you feel great, that's going to be a reinforcer. It's going to make you more likely to go to a party the next time there's a party. So understanding operant conditioning and behaviorism is quite useful to understanding human psychology. So if you aren't clear on that, I would definitely recommend you find a good video on YouTube and watch it. Social learning theory is essentially the idea that we learn by watching others. Person who came up with this theory also came up with the idea of self-efficacy. It refers to a person's belief about their own abilities and talents. Self-efficacy is very important to happiness. If we don't feel like we have efficacy, we will become depressed. We need to feel like we have a certain degree of power in the world to act to meet our needs. Otherwise, we're going to be sad about that. Okay, so theories of cognitive development. The primary one is Piaget, although we'll talk about some others. Piaget's theory says we develop in 4 discrete stages. There's also information processing theories that says, like computer, we become more efficient at processing information. The brain is an information processing machine, just like a computer is. It means it takes information in through our senses and spits information out. Vygotsky's theory is another cognitive theory. It's more sociocultural. It's about the expectations that we are put upon us at different ages, and about how growing up is very much like an apprenticeship of sorts, right? We are sort of apprenticing with our parents and with the older children in our lives and with the other adults in our lives, whether that's in a church environment or in our public school, right? We're learning how to be a person in the particular society that we have grown up in. And that's an important concept because we learn how to be a man or a woman from our parents primarily, of course, also from television and social media and things like that as well. But the first influence of these things, what does it mean to be a person or a specific gender or a specific race or religion? We're learning these things through the people around us, and we're imitating and we're trying to become like them as children. These are the different stages in Piaget's theory. He had 4 original stages. Some additional stages have been added to make it a little more complete. I won't go through them right now in the interest of time, and we will talk more about these later. But essentially, so sensory motor is like babies just putting stuff in their mouth. Pre-operational is, so operation is another term for logic. So this is what he would call pre-logical thinking. This is being able to think logically about objects that are in front of us. That's why it's called concrete. And then we have this stage of formal operational, which is being able to think logically in an abstract way. So the simplest way to explain that is this is something like algebra, you might say, being able to reason about abstract concepts, about variables. These other stages have been added to say that, look, thinking doesn't just stop in adolescence, because adults become better thinkers, and the way they become better thinkers is not exactly becoming more logical, but other skills that help us think, like being able to take the perspective of others. As we get older, we begin to be able to sort of think not just in black and white, but in shades of gray, be able to take other people's perspectives more seriously and understand them, things like that. So things that kind of go beyond purely logical brain development, which finishes in adolescence or early. Okay. Here's the ecological systems approach. I'll zoom in a little bit here, maybe. Maybe this is better anyways. So we've got the microsystem with the parents and child. Around that, we've got a mesosystem of school and friends. We've got an exosystem, parents, places of employment, parents' social network, government and social policies. And then we've got a macro system like historical events, culture, ethnic group, right? So all of our development is taking place in the early 21st century, in a time when social media dominates our lives, in a time of computers, in a time when capitalism is out of control and real wages are extremely low and people are struggling to survive financially, right? All these things affect development, as well as these other things as well, which are sort of more obvious. Okay. Okay, Lawton and Nehemau's competence environmental press theory. According to this theory, adaptation or development depends on the person's abilities or competencies and the demands the environment presses or places on the person. And the idea being that we have to find a best fit, right? So, for example, some people have ADHD, but it doesn't get diagnosed until they get to high school, until they get to college, because maybe in elementary school or middle school they're able the workload isn't that intense and it doesn't really, their ADHD doesn't really affect their academic performance. But once they start getting more homework, more stuff to keep track of, that's when the ADHD becomes a problem, right? So the environment interacts with a person's own abilities in profound ways. And that's just one example of ADHD, but there's many others, right? A person's ability to cope with stress might be okay up to a certain point, but then maybe someone's in a really difficult situation, a lot of challenges. Maybe their parents are addicts, but they're still surviving through that. But then one of their parents has an overdose, and that is what pushes them over the edge, right? So it's always about this interaction between a person's abilities and the demands our environment is making on us. Lifespan perspective is the idea that aging is a lifelong process, conception to death. So this is not like, okay, we develop and then we're done at 25 and then we just sort of decrease from there. But it's the idea that we're actually developing new capacities, new ways of thinking, new ways of doing things. We're learning throughout the entirety of our life. The selective optimization with compensation theory is about how choices determine and regulate development, right? So the choices we make now affect our future. People always think, oh, if I could go back and, you do one little thing, you change everything for the future. Well, if that's true, then it's also true that something little we do now will have profound effects on our development in the future. If you make a choice to do 100 push-ups every morning before you do anything else, that is going to change how you develop mentally, physically, emotionally. And that's just one example, of course. Life course perspective, different generations experience/adjust to biological, psychological, and sociocultural forces within historical contexts. So this is about the individual timing of life events in relation to external historical timelines, synchronization of an individual's transitions with collective familial ones, the impact of earlier life experiences shaped by historical events on subsequent ones, etc. So this is a lot of information. We will sort of unpack all this stuff as the course goes on. So this is something you may want to print out. You may want to copy out, put it on a big poster board, just stare at it, come back to it, because there's a lot here. It takes 3 different slides to cover it all, and it has psychodynamic theories, has learning theories, has different cognitive theories. It has these ecological systems theories, right? So lifespan perspective and life course perspective. So take a look at all this. You don't have to have everything memorized right now, but sort of try and soak this in at some point in some way, whatever works best for you. Okay, so we have a bit more time, so let's get into the rest of this chapter, or at least this next topic, which is a bit about the research, because psychology is a science, and it has, the reason it's a science is because we do scientific research, which means there are specific research methodologies that are used in this discipline of psychology, which are a bit different than, say, physics or something else. And then within psychology, developmental psychologists tend to have certain types of research methodologies that they use relative to other disciplines in psychology. Okay, so key questions. What are the 4 approaches researchers use to measure topics of interest in studying human development? What are the major aspects of each? What are reliability and validity? What are the 3 general designs for research? What are the major aspects of each? What are the 3 specific research designs used in developmental research? What are the major aspects of each? What are the main tools and archives available to help researchers study human development? What is the main purpose of each? What are the techniques researchers use to integrate results from multiple studies? What are ethical procedures researchers must follow in studying human development? What are the ways investigators communicate results from research studies? And what are the ways research affects public policy? So the more you can better understand scientific research, the better off you'll be just in life in general, because we have to process information. That's what our brain does. And some of the information we come across in the modern world is scientific information about a new study about your health, a new study about how to be happy, right? So the more we're able to understand this stuff and be literate in the vocabulary of scientific research, the better equipped we are to make our way through the world. And that's, a big part of college. You're coming to learn specific skills for your degree, but you will also be sort of learning general things that will better equip you to be successful in life. Okay, so to make something a science, if something's going to be a science, there has to be measurement. If you're not measuring anything, then you're not doing science. Okay, well, how do we measure? We observe, and there can be 2 kinds. One is naturalistic or real-life observation, observing people in the real world. Now, psychologists don't really go out and with a pad, a paper, and a pen and sit on a park bench or something and observe people. I mean, occasionally they do something like that, but that would be definitely less than 1% of the studies. But you might do a naturalistic observation by asking people about their daily habits, right? Do you use social media for more than 4 hours a day or more than 2 hours a day? Or how often do you use social media? Or what do you eat for breakfast? Or, all kinds of things like that. A structured observation would be you bring someone into a lab and you do something to them, or you ask them to do something and you observe their behavior. So here, the example listed here is showing photos to measure emotion recognition accuracy. Or we might use self-reports. We might measure self-esteem using a questionnaire. Or we might use physiological measures, like we can measure a person's skin response, skin conductivity, or pupil dilation to measure how, it says here to measure interest, but interest is not really the right word. What we're measuring is sympathetic arousal, means how much are we, how much is our sympathetic nervous system kicking in? When your sympathetic nervous system kicks in, it could be because you're excited, or it could be because you're scared or anxious. And that's going to do things like dilate your pupils, increase your heart rate, change your breathing rate, things like that. Increase cortisol levels. Okay. reliability and validity, two important concepts when we're talking about research. Reliability, does this method consistently measure what is being studied, right? So an example would be IQ test yielding identical or close to identical scores when given twice over a 2-week interval. And then validity is, does this accurately measure the variable of interest, right? So sticking with the IQ example, does an IQ test actually measure intelligence, or is it measuring something else? When we do a study, we can't ask everyone in the United States or everyone in Ohio or even everyone in Athens. We're always taking a sample. We try to take large samples because our work will be more accurate. If you have a sample of 10 people and you want to know average height, what are the average height for Americans? And you ask 10 people their height. Well, if you have someone who's 6'5" and one out of 10, that's going to change the average. But if I ask 1,000 people, it's unlikely that I'm going to have one person, or it's really impossible to have one person dramatically affect the results, right? So that's why we try and take a large sample. We try and take a broad sample. We try to make sure that our sample includes people of different races, genders, socioeconomic statuses, education levels, things like that. But that's always a challenge, is making sure our sample can give us the right answers. Okay, general research designs. So the first type of study is called a correlational study. You may have heard the phrase correlation does not equal causation. It is a very important phrase. That means that just because two things happen to go together, it does not mean that one caused the other, right? So maybe I start eating an ice cream cone and then I have a heart attack. Does that mean my ice cream cone caused my heart attack? No, not necessarily. It could just be that it just happened at that moment, right? We do know that, we just had daylight savings. We do know that people are more likely to have a heart attack on the Monday morning after daylight savings because sleep affects your body profoundly, right? So that correlation is actually causal. So we have to do more to figure out whether two things going together. So a good example, drinking a little bit of wine and positive health outcomes. So there's a lot of studies that have shown a slightly positive correlation between drinking some wine and positive health outcomes. Now, it turns out that is a pure correlation. There's no causation there. Alcohol is actually bad for you, no matter the kind, no matter the amount. It is a poison. I'm not saying you should never drink it for fun. Not everything good for us is fun, and we don't always have to do the healthiest thing. But alcohol is not healthy for us. Studies showing a correlational result are not true. All right, alcohol is not good for us. But there's also been a lot of studies showing that drinking coffee is good for us. That's, again, a correlation. You ask people, how much coffee do you drink? And you look at how likely they are to suffer from various diseases. So like wine, it turns out that coffee has a positive correlation with a lot of different health outcomes. Now, actually, coffee is healthy for you. So drinking coffee, don't drink 10 cups a day, but drinking 1 to 3, even 4 cups, if you do it in the morning, can be healthy for you. Actually is healthy, but if it's keeping you up, then don't do that. All right. So correlation doesn't prove causation. To prove causation, we need to show some kind of mechanism. We need to have an explanation for why this effect is happening. We need to prove our explanation to be true. So here's an example of 3 possible interpretations. So think about these two things as this stuff over here as being X and this stuff over here as being Y. So X, or being smart, could cause having more friends. Having more friends could make you smart. Or if you have parents who are, and you can think about this as a third variable, Z. So in this model, X is causing Y. In the second model, Y is causing X. And in the third model, Z is causing both X and Y. So when you have a statistical correlation, two things going together, it could be one of 3 possibilities. X causes Y, Y causes X, or a third variable, z, causes both x and y. So that's why we do experimental studies. These studies systematically study the possible cause and effect relationships between two variables. I'm not going to try and explain this too much. I strongly recommend you watch some videos and learn about it if you don't understand the concepts of independent variable, dependent variable, things like that. Just go to YouTube, watch some videos. We only have a short period of time, but understanding how scientific research is done is super important. You could also watch some videos on correlation and causation. Qualitative studies are studies where you don't actually measure things, you just talk to people. They're not true science, but sometimes they're done to sort of help us point us in the right direction. When we're now specifically in developmental psychology, we basically have two options for studies. One is a longitudinal study and one is a cross-sectional study. So longitudinal study means we have the same group of people and we follow them over a long period of time. We might call them in every year, every 2 years, every 5 years, every 7 years. We ask them the same questions. We take the same blood work. We ask them about their depression, their anxiety. We ask them how many friends they have. We ask them how happy they are. We ask them if they've gotten married, divorced, they have kids, whatever we're interested in. You have lots of questions and you ask the same group of people repeatedly over time. Now, these are very great studies. They're very useful. There's two downsides. One is they take a very long time to complete. Some longitudinal studies have been going for 60, 70 years. And the other downside is that they're very expensive. A cross-sectional study is done at one period of time, but we ask different age groups. So, it's 2024. I want to do a cross-sectional study. I get people and I'm studying depression. I study it in 5-year-olds. I study it in 5 to 10-year-olds. I study it in 10 to 15-year-olds. I study it in 15 to 20-year-olds. I study it in 25 to 30-year-olds, etc. So for each age group, I ask them the same questions. Now, the problem here is that there are cohort effects, right? So, for example, nowadays, baby boomers have most of the wealth in our country. So people like me, millennials or Gen Xers, or people like you all, Gen Z, Gen Alpha, well, Gen Alpha is still children. The rest of us, we do not have a very large portion of the wealth of this country, right? So when you start asking people about their mental health, well, money is a big factor, right? So it's not simply a matter of age that's going to play a difference, that's going to contribute to a difference between baby boomers and millennials and mental health. It also, money could be a factor, but also technology is a factor, right? Younger people tend to be on technology more. So when you're doing a cohort, a cross-sectional study, we're looking at age and we're dividing things by age, but we have to also be thinking about the differences in other life situations between these different age groups. Okay, you can do combinations of these two designs, which can be useful. We don't need to talk about too much of that. A meta-analysis is a useful type of study. It's very important to understand what that is because, and this will help, and this will kind of be our main, I think, kind of our main last topic. So here's what happens. You have a scientist has an idea. They come up with a way of measuring something. Essentially, they figure out how to design an experiment. Then they get the funding for their experiment. They run their experiment. That could take anywhere from a few weeks to years. They get the results. If the results show something interesting statistically, right? So you have to measure things and you have to analyze those results statistically. If the results of your experiment are statistically significant, then, and you think it's worth publishing, it's a useful contribution, you will then write that up in the form of an article for publication. You'll then submit that to a scientific journal. The editors of that journal will then review your research. If they deem it worthy for publication, they will allow you to publish it in their journal. Then the rest of the scientific community will look at your work and maybe they'll think you're wrong or maybe they'll think you're right. And they will do experiments that either further confirm your results or they'll do experiments to try and disprove your results. And this could go on for some time. And eventually you have lots and lots of studies on a certain topic. And then what you can do is you can do a meta-analysis. So each one of these studies is using statistics to analyze data from participants in those studies. A meta-analysis uses statistics to analyze the results of all these different studies. So you can have a meta-analysis that includes the results from hundreds of studies. And that meta-analysis essentially is going to include the results of potentially hundreds of thousands of different participants. And again, the more people you have as part of your study, the better. So really in a field like psychology, a lot of times things are sort of proven, quote unquote, proven conclusively as much as they can be proven when we have enough studies, when we've done enough studies on a topic to do a meta-analysis on it. Now, meta-analyses aren't perfect. They have their limitations, but that is kind of the final sort of step on a topic of research. The last stuff is about doing research ethically, something called an IRB, Institutional Review Board, that makes sure people aren't being harmed, animals aren't being harmed, etc. We won't talk too much about that, but you can read about it. Okay, yep, that's the end. All right, so that was the first chapter. You'll still need to go through and read it, but hopefully that is a useful introduction to developmental psychology. Make sure you read chapter 2. Go ahead. So for this week, like pretty much every week, we'll have our the weekly journal. You've got your discussion posts. Then you've got your quizzes. The quizzes are due by Saturday night, 11:59 p.m. And then we will have our next meeting Sunday morning. Okay. Any questions? All right, you all. Have a good week. I know it's busy and crazy. It's the first week. Shoot me an email if you have any questions. My email is posted in the front page there under my contact information. So just send me an email if you have any questions about anything. And I will talk to you on Sunday when we have our next meeting.